Let's step inside this elite ballroom. It fell dead silent when Eleanor raised her glass. 300 wealthy guests turned. Silas Renwick stood by the lighting rig, wearing a cheap, borrowed suit. Eleanor's tone cut clean and cold. Too poor to buy the silver on this table, mister. Renwick, too poor to court my daughter. Hadley just froze between them. Silas didn't answer her, he didn't even flinch. Hidden inside his pocket sat a sealed envelope from a major corporate buyout firm, dated 3 days ago. The socialite smirked. She had zero idea she just declared war on the unexpected new owner of her entire family empire. April rolled into Charleston just like it always does, thick, slow, and humid. Azaleas blooming down Trad Street felt like quiet little acts of confession. Silas Renwick quietly signed the rental lease for that Anson Street cottage on the 14th. He paid 6 months up front with a Boston cashier's check. Not a single person in this high society town bothered to question the quiet single father. The place was tiny, just 2 bedrooms and a front porch holding one lonely rocking chair. Out back, a magnolia tree scraped against the gutters whenever the harbor wind picked up. Little Wren claimed her bedroom. Silas took the leftover one. By their second morning, Wren discovered an old screen door on the back porch that wouldn't shut quite right. She pointed it out to her dad using the universal language of an 8-year-old kid. Silas knelt down, inspected the rusted hinge, and promised her he would fix it up. But he didn't fix it that day. He didn't even touch it that whole week. The door stayed crooked because sometimes the only way to process leaving Boston was letting small things stay broken. You and I have probably felt that exact same way. The Beaumont Inn sat right down Trad Street, 4 blocks south. 1847 brick and the absolute crown jewel of the wealthy Peton family empire. Silas toured the luxury property site alongside the old construction foreman that Tuesday morning. The guy pointed out the crumbling plaster, ruined cornices, and a massive second-floor structural beam that had been dangerously sagging for 11 straight years. Silas just listened. He'd already memorized the engineering reports during his flight down here. The big project kickoff landed Thursday. He showed up 10 minutes early, wearing a simple denim shirt and scuffed work boots that had seen decades of hard, actual labor. Hadley Peton strolled in 2 minutes late, completely alone, no assistant, just a sleek leather folder tucked under her arm. 36 years old, she confidently introduced herself by calling him by his first name. She didn't bother introducing him to anyone else. Silas calmly unrolled the structural blueprints across the table. He read the plans like a master pianist reading sheet music, taking in the whole harmony, not just single notes. Flipping straight to sheet 3, he tapped a weak connection joint near that sagging second-floor beam. And plainly stated, "This ceiling will collapse under a live load unless we reinforce it before demolition even starts." Hadley stared at the blueprint. Then she looked up at him. That stare held for 1 second longer than a normal look with a hired contractor ever should. Right behind him, the heavy corridor door suddenly pushed open a crack. Little Wren had been waiting out in the lobby with a coloring book, but she wandered off. She peeked through the gap, 8 years old, dark braid falling loose on one side. Hadley spotted the kid first. Hadley gave her a smile, the kind of cheap Charleston charm that costs nothing, yet carries heavy, silent weight. Silas caught that smile. He smoothly stepped between the two of them and said, "Wren, back to the foyer." "Give me 10 minutes. His daughter left. Silas firmly shut the heavy door. He refused to look Hadley's way again until the entire meeting wrapped up. "Come with me." At 7 that evening inside that tiny cottage, Silas finally opened the worn envelope he'd carried from Boston. Inside was a single photograph. "You and I should start with the photograph. Summer 2011. Marin on the Beaumont Inn steps, sunlit in a yellow dress, magnolias behind her. She was 28 in that picture. She would be 38 today." Silas quietly flipped the faded picture face down on the table. Little Wren wandered in barefoot, holding a cracker. "Daddy, where are we?" The single father stared at the blank photo back for a long, heavy second. "Where Mommy used to be." Wren nodded like that made perfect sense of Charleston. Then she just finished her snack and asked about dinner time. 3 weeks into the real estate restoration, Silas scattered the subcontractor bids across his cottage dining table on a quiet Saturday. The man worked relentlessly, grinding away well past Sunday midnight. By 6 in the morning on Monday, he had mapped out the financial analysis by hand on a single cream paper. The historic plaster work contract was 38% above market rate. The vendor, Heritage Restoration Specialists, LLC, the company's principal was a man named Bradford Peton, nephew of the wealthy matriarch Eleanor, Hadley's own cousin. Any normal blue-collar worker would have ignored this. Plenty of guys looked the other way on plenty of corrupt jobs everywhere. The inflated cost fit the project budget. The renovation work would still happen. The family empire would easily eat the cost, but Silas refused. He quietly dropped that paper on Hadley's desk at the site office at 7:20, before she walked in. His neat handwriting laid out comparable transaction benchmarks across 4 major southeastern preservation projects. He ran an exact return rate calculation showing the overcharge across the entire contract. And right there at the bottom, a single legal citation. A Delaware Chancery Court ruling on the fiduciary duty of controlling corporate shareholders. Signed with 2 simple letters, S.R. Hadley found it at 8:04. She studied it again at 8:11. She didn't call her cousin or her powerful mother. She didn't march down the hall to demand how a laborer like Silas Renwick knew to quote complex Delaware corporate law. She just sat at her desk. For a long minute, just watching the morning light catch the historic building across King Street. And then she drafted a brand new email to the project's Compliance Council, formally requesting a quiet, standard protocol rebid on the overpriced plasterwork package. That new bid dropped by 19%. The honest contract went out next Tuesday. The angry cousin called Eleanor that Wednesday afternoon. The elite matriarch listened. She never called Hadley. Instead, Eleanor opened her sleek laptop, typing 3 simple words into search. Silas Renwick contractor. The internet results were frankly pathetic. A Boston builder's license, some tiny company registered over in Massachusetts. A 4-year-old Cambridge charity dinner photo. Silas in a sharp suit standing next to a woman whose face was completely turned away from the camera. Eleanor snapped the laptop shut. She immediately rang up her personal assistant. Find absolutely everything on this nobody foreman at the Beaumont Restoration. Now watch this closely. That Wednesday, Hadley crossed paths with Silas on the 2nd floor. He held a carpenter's level. She held a corporate binder. They didn't even stop walking. She only murmured. The plaster rebid came in much cleaner. He simply replied, glad to hear it. Neither slowed down, but Hadley finally paused at the stairs, watching the supposedly lowly contractor walk down the long corridor. She stared at him like a forbidden door her wealthy family warned her never to touch. You and I know the truth. Her elite family thought no outsider could touch them, until him. You and I know how a dynasty bleeds, small thefts, soft fraud hidden in the dark. The elite always called Hadley paranoid, claiming she just didn't understand how a real legacy worked. Yet here stood a dismissed laborer in work boots who had casually reviewed 4 blueprints and a single column of numbers, instantly spotting the corruption she had tracked for years. She had no idea who this invisible worker was or what he built before reaching Charleston. She didn't know who signed his cheap lease or what quiet resilience actually brought him here, or whose lonely grave he quietly visited on crisp October weekends. She only cared about his math. His financial analysis was spotless, and it was right. For the first time in 11 long years, she realized a commoner saw the impending ruin. That late May Saturday brought a breathtaking Charleston morning, the kind that made the wealthy city legendary. Golden harbor lights spilled low and warm all across the famous battery. The summer cicadas had not even started, and the grand magnolia behind the Beaumont estate sat at the absolute peak of its brief white bloom. Silas brought little Wren to the job site just because she asked. The 8-year-old had politely begged to come, and the rough demolition crew was off today. He let the child play outside while he sat up on the 2nd floor, holding a cheap clipboard and pencil. He tackled the slow, precise job of measuring a window that hadn't closed correctly since 1971. Hadley strolled down the brick path at 10:15. She never expected to find a worker's child there. The wealthy heiress visited because she came almost every Saturday. To her, that walled garden was the only corner of the vast Peton estate that didn't feel suffocatingly rich. Little Wren crouched right by the giant magnolia tree, closely studying a green fern. Hadley sat on the brick edge beside the girl, playfully asking for the fern's opinion on the weather. Without looking up, Wren stated the fern was busy. Hadley actually laughed aloud once. That was the first time she had laughed anywhere on Peton property in 9 long months. She silently noted that rare joy, much like a woman treasuring the arrival of a totally unexpected letter. She kept her mouth shut. Instead, she just sat quietly and listened to the little fern. After a few seconds, Wren quietly said, "My mommy is in heaven. Daddy says heaven is the place where magnolias are always the quietest." Hadley didn't reply right away. She just watched the leafy fern alongside Wren for a bit. Finally, she whispered, "I had a cousin once who said almost exactly that same thing. She loved this garden much more than any other place in Charleston. She taught me how to read a tricky balance sheet when I was 16. Every Sunday we sat on that bench, and she'd point at the magnolia, calling it the only truly honest thing on this entire wealthy estate." Wren glanced up at her. "What was her name, Marin?" The little girl tasted that forgotten name silently, nodded once, and returned to her fern. "You and I know small details matter." Upstairs, that Beaumont window was open 6 inches. The underestimated laborer had heard every single word. He froze, staying completely still for a long time. The pencil rested on the clipboard. His rough hand rested heavily on the pencil. Outside, his innocent daughter was talking to an elite stranger about her late mother. And this high society stranger was recalling a beloved woman who had also been Silas's own wife. Both women were talking about the exact same person, yet neither one in the garden realized it. He finally lowered the clipboard with the absolute care of a man handling something incredibly fragile. 10 minutes later, he descended the back stairs, habitually kicked off his dirty work boots, and stepped out into the wealthy garden in just his socks. "Watch this shift with me." Wren ran over. Hadley stood, observing him with a profound new respect. The quiet future owner looked right back with the same. Neither of them spoke a word. Neither of them dared to step closer. After a quiet pause, Hadley murmured, "She was barefoot in this garden once too, wearing a yellow dress. 2011, I think. I have a picture somewhere," Silas replied. "I know the dress, that was it." He offered no explanation. She didn't ask. They lingered in the dirt until Wren chased a passing butterfly, gently dragging them both back to a much safer, much smaller conversation. But that heavy, unspoken connection was now something they both carried. Eleanor marched back from New York on the 2nd of June. In a foul, perfectly polished mood. 3 days battling a private equity firm over Peton bond structures. She hated it, unaware that true power was already shifting right under her nose. She touched down in Charleston International at 4:20 and stormed into her King Street office by 5:30. She swept past Hadley's open office door without even glancing inside. The annual Peton Charitable Foundation Gala was scheduled for the 17th. Black tie, 300 elite guests. The mayor, the bishop, the historic preservation boss. Plus 4 major financial backers who had ghosted them for 3 years, who desperately needed sweet-talking. On June 8th, Greta, Eleanor's loyal assistant for 22 long years, walked into Hadley's office and dropped a small ivory envelope on the desk without speaking. Greta didn't stick around. She never did when dropping off Eleanor's little paper bombs. Hadley tore it open at her desk. It wasn't a question, just a tight, suffocating paragraph and a half. At the upcoming gala, Eleanor wrote, she was announcing Hadley's engagement to Whitman Ashcroft IV. Here to the wealthy Ashcroft banking empire down on Broad Street. The Ashcrofts had been high society allies for 4 long generations. Eleanor had already brokered the entire marriage like a corporate merger over a private March dinner. Hadley would play along. The announcement would be perfectly tasteful. Greta would control the press list. Hadley read the cruel words twice. She hadn't even laid eyes on Whitman Ashcroft in 8 years. Last time, the 26-year-old heir had clumsily dumped a full flute of champagne all over her shoes at a fancy art opening. She marched straight down the hall to Eleanor's office. Her mother sat working. Hadley shut the heavy door behind her, refusing to sit. "You didn't even ask me." "I didn't need to. You will marry a man who matches this grand empire." "Hadley, Whitman is suitable, his wealthy family is suitable, the PR timing is perfect. Women of our extreme status do not wait around to be courted by some nobody. You and I know how badly that arrogance will age." Hadley stood frozen in that doorway for one long, silent moment. Then she walked out. She completely ignored her office. Instead, she drove south through the old historic district, leaving all the car windows rolled down. She cruised right past the corporate building at the speed limit, past the sprawling marina. She even drove past the massive estate she grew up in without slowing down once. Her entire life was spent quietly bowing to Eleanor's ironclad rules. Those sacrifices had become so silent, she totally forgot the massive price she paid. She drove straight to the Beaumont, parked quietly on a dark side street. She walked around to the hidden harborside porch. The one the staff ignored, kicked off her expensive shoes, and sat on the top step in the pitch black. It was 8:40 when Silas walked around the corner from the Anson cottage. Watch closely now. Drawn by some quiet, unspoken instinct, holding a heavy flashlight he never even clicked on. He spotted her sitting on the step. He walked up the dirt path quietly, asking absolutely nothing. He took a seat one step below her, a humble position for the man destined to buy her family's legacy, and placed a cold water bottle nearby. She drank and set it down. The harbor lights blinked. You and I know whose empire this really is. Picture this, a shrimp boat drifting past Sullivan's Island, slow and entirely ignored. 23 minutes passed in total, heavy silence. When Hadley finally stood up, she rested her hand lightly on his shoulder, walking past. Just once, exactly the way someone leans on a railing they absolutely trust. Then she headed down the path to her car and drove home. The single father sat alone on that step for another hour. He left the flashlight off. June 17th arrived feeling hot and deceptively clean. The marble ballroom at Peton Mansion opened twice a year for 58 years. In all that time, the elite family gala never once failed to dazzle its wealthy guests. Towering white columns, 3 crystal chandeliers, 1880 originals, a string quartet playing, and 300 guests dressed in black tie. They served elite Charleston rice and fresh oysters. The wine was a dry Sonoma vintage the Peton family had backed since 1994. We see this kind of arrogance everywhere, don't we? Those chandeliers were polished by hand by women completely barred from the grand rooms their own hard work illuminated. The ballroom looked stunning. It was always meant to look completely flawless. That was its only setting. Silas was simply there as lighting crew. The custom lighting rig was tossed into the project scope at the very last minute. The crew lead was expected to stay all night, managing those temporary rigs and working the dimmer panel tucked away by the service hallway. He wore a cheap black suit borrowed from one of the younger restoration guys. The shoulders were a quarter-inch too wide. He honestly did not care. Tucked securely in his inside pocket sat that heavy envelope. Foster Linwood had handed it to him 3 days ago in an East Bay parking lot. He had not opened it yet. He still needed to figure out what opening it meant. Hadley spotted him from across the floor at 8:12. She walked over, offering no greeting. Stopping a foot away, she stared at the dimmer panel he was faking checking and spoke. "Thank you for the water," he said. "Of course," she spoke again. "She is announcing it tonight." He nodded slowly. "I know." They stood there another moment, sharing a completely invisible conversation. Across the room, the wealthy mother watched them. Her face showed the cold patience of someone making cruel judgments. Whitman Ashcraft IV approached Hadley at 8:19, wearing the smug smile of an arrogant man who thought he already controlled the future. Hadley took one small half-step backward. Whitman kept smiling, but the entire room noticed that subtle half-step. 3 elite women near the stage saw it. Eleanor definitely saw it. She set down her glass. She marched to the service corridor, cornering the quiet tradesman alone by the window to put him in his place. She held a folded check. "Twice your annual income, Mr. Renwick." "Cashier's check. You finished the Beaumont job through your crew lead by proxy. You leave Charleston tomorrow morning, and you take the child far away with you. The Peton family wishes you luck in Boston." Silas studied the check, then looked straight at her. He never raised his voice or tensed up. He just calmly replied, "No, ma'am." Eleanor's eyes darkened. She expected a poor man's anger which she could handle. His total calm felt dangerous. The wealthy matriarch marched back to the center of the ballroom and lifted her glass for the toast. A heavy silence rippled out from her in a circle. "Before I welcome our extraordinary guests," she announced, "I must address something that has deeply distressed me tonight." The room turned. "There is a tradesman here tonight mistaken about his place. They always misjudge the quiet ones, don't they? He is far too poor to buy the silver on these tables, Mr. Renwick, too poor to court my daughter. I trust you won't embarrass yourself further." Hadley froze. Silas took the insult without blinking. He let them sneer. In his pocket, an unopened letter from Foster Linwood sat waiting for 3 days. Eleanor smirked at her own cruelty. She had no idea whose empire she just insulted. 3 mornings after that gala on June 20th, Foster Linwood finally phoned Silas's quiet little cottage directly. He didn't even say his name. He just gave a service entrance address at the Beaumont Inn and a time, 2 p.m. One instruction. Silas slipped through the back kitchen at exactly 1:58. Foster waited down in the wine cellar, a thick stone vault right under the main dining room. 1847 brick, kept freezing cold, always locked. Foster had the key. He bolted the heavy door behind Silas. Foster Linwood was 62 years old. For 34 years, he was the top corporate lawyer for the wealthy Peton family. Let's rewind. In 2020, he stood silently in the back at Marin's Boston funeral, totally ignored by everyone. Silas recalled the back of that chapel. He didn't remember seeing the man there. He really should have. Foster was the only one wearing a Peton tie pin, a tiny silver magnolia tucked beneath his dark suit lapel. Marin would have recognized it. Marin saw those details. Now Foster slapped 3 manila folders on the oak-tasting table. Sit, Silas. Foster flipped open the first folder. Renwick Holdings, a Massachusetts limited partnership. The principal was Silas himself, hiding through 14 shell companies across Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming, and the Caymans. Current stake in Peton Hospitality voting stock, 47.3%. It was secretly bought up between January 2019 and April of this very year. Silas didn't blink. He already knew his corporate buyout to the 3rd decimal. Foster opened the second file, Eleanor's pandemic-era debt from spring 2020. She had taken a massive margin loan, putting the family's sacred preferred shares up as collateral. She arrogantly misjudged the downturn's actual length. By December, the mighty Eleanor Peton quietly defaulted on that very margin loan. Her shares were liquidated through 3 quiet intermediaries. 2 intermediaries, Foster noted, were actually buying for you. The woman accidentally sold her empire to the single father she just tried bribing with a $10,000 check. Silas shut his eyes for a second. When he opened them, Foster tapped the 3rd folder. Thursday morning. A 9 a.m. board meeting on the 14th floor of Peton Tower. Agenda item number 3, strategic restructuring. This ruthless move strips Hadley Peton of her chief operating role, handing total operational control right back to Eleanor as chair. Eleanor barely scraped together enough votes from the entitled family directors. She plans to claim she's saving the business from Hadley's supposedly erratic and poor judgment. She'll definitely bring up that plasterwork rebid mess. She'll use that tiny stumble at the gala against her. Silas stared at the 3rd folder. Foster sighed. I've sat on this hostile takeover for 11 weeks. Foster continued. My attorney-client privilege protects every single word I've ever spoken with Eleanor Peton in private. He paused. But I have absolutely no legal duty to warn her about my chats with you. I'm also not required to tell her the ultimate punchline. He sighed. That while acting as her top lawyer, I've been making sure your takeover filings quietly cleared. You and I can see the risk he took. I've walked a very dangerous line here, Mr. Renwick. Silas looked up. Foster held his steady gaze. Foster whispered, you can stop her Thursday morning. Let's look at the choice he faced. Walk into that boardroom and stop it, but stop being just Silas the humble contractor. Silas thought of Marin and of his little girl Wren, sleeping peacefully in that tiny cottage with her braid undone. He pictured Hadley, sitting on the harbor steps in the dark, never demanding a single thing from him. He gave one nod. Foster slid the 3rd folder across the table. Then I will see you Thursday morning, June 25th, the lawyer told him. 9th floor lobby of the Peton Tower at 8:40 a.m. Silas rode that elevator up to the 14th floor completely alone. He wore a sharp charcoal suit tailored 3 years ago by a guy on Newberry Street up in Boston. The work jacket and scuffed boots were gone. His shoes shined. That folded envelope from Foster Linwood finally opened up, rested inside his breast pocket. The board met at 9 sharp, 12 directors, Eleanor holding court at the head of the long mahogany table. Hadley sat to her left in a slate suit, hands flat on a closed leather portfolio. Foster Linwood took his usual chair. 3rd from the corner, folders stacked by his elbow, Eleanor called the meeting to order. Good morning. Before we review the operational reports, the chair moves under Article 7. Section 3. To address a strategic restructuring of the Chief Operating Officer's role. I won't sugarcoat this. Hadley's leadership has been a true credit to our family for years. However, the company is entering a phase that demands consolidated authority. The chair proposes that all operational duties be temporarily reabsorbed into my own office, effective immediately, pending a full strategic review. Hadley refused to look up. She kept her hands planted on that leather portfolio. The boardroom door opened. Silas stepped inside. He strolled in completely calm, not even bothering to look around. He made his way to the empty chair at the far end of the table. Stick with me here. He took Beauregard Peton's dusty seat unused for decades and simply sat. Hadley turned in her chair, her breath catching once in total silence. Nobody noticed but Foster, who kept his head down. Eleanor actually laughed, just one sharp sound. Excuse me, Mr. Renwick. Why exactly is the contractor sitting in on a closed Peton board session? Foster slowly stood up. He grabbed the top folder from the stack beside him. He slid it down the entire length of the table, past 4 directors, stopping right at Eleanor. Madam Chair, Foster announced, the contractor is the controlling shareholder. The entire room froze solid. She opened it. 47.3% voting common. Renwick Holdings acted as general partner for 14 LLCs, hiding in the registry as separate institutional investors. Notarized, audited, and certified by the Delaware Council of Record. Eleanor read the cover page, and then she read it again. Her expression never showed real shock. Instead, she showed the dead quiet of a woman realizing she had been losing for 6 straight years without a clue. It was her left hand resting on the table that finally gave away her panic. Her thumb twitched once against her index finger, just one tiny, dry, nervous motion. Foster saw her mother do that exact same thing in 1991, right after a massive bond auction failed completely. He ignored it completely. The other 11 directors grabbed their own copies passed down the table. Then Silas finally spoke up using his true voice. His tone stayed low and steady. He never stood up. Under Article 7 of the bylaws, a majority holder may, the man you dismiss today owns your tomorrow. By written shareholder action, remove the chair and appoint a successor without further board approval. I am exercising that right today. Eleanor Peton is removed as chairwoman, effective at the close of this very sentence. Hadley Peton is appointed chairwoman and chief executive officer, effective immediately. Foster Linwood stays on as interim general counsel under a revised mandate. The strategic restructuring is withdrawn. The underestimated man placed one signed paper on the table. Eleanor stood. The mighty matriarch opened her mouth, found absolutely no words, and retreated. Hadley stayed glued to her leather portfolio. Silas simply looked at her once. The man they once mocked didn't speak. He just walked out, leaving her in charge. She sat alone at the head of the corporate empire. Let's follow her, shall we? Friday, 7:40 p.m. The heiress parked outside his humble Anson's Street cottage, sitting frozen in her car before stepping out. Little Wren was already asleep. Over peanut butter toast, Silas had warned his daughter that Miss Hadley might visit. Wren just nodded. Kids always seem to grasp the unspoken shifts in power around them. Silas pulled the door open before she even knocked, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon. Marin's favorite brand. He placed them on the kitchen table, sat across, and calmly waited. Hadley gripped her glass tightly with both hands, but took no sip. Who was Marin to you? Silas had rehearsed his answer for 6 long years. He had never spoken it aloud. She was my wife. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a magnolia branch scraped the gutter and paused. Marin Peton Renwick, he added. She arrived in Boston in October 2013, right after your mother banished her. She was vice president of corporate operations. Your mother claimed Marin had temperamental leadership. They voted her out, 8-4. Marin left the corporate tower at 11:15 that Tuesday morning, and she never looked back. Hadley stared at him, unblinking. I met her exactly 4 months after she fell. She was consulting for a hospitality firm on State Street. We got married in May 2014. Wren arrived in 2017. They found the pancreatic cancer in November 2018. She fought for 18 months. She passed away February 4, 2020. Hadley let out a tiny broken gasp. She worked until month 7. She even wrote a short book exploring Southern hospitality history. A manuscript which her trusted editor at a university press located in Charleston, published in May 2020. It remains in print today in a soft blue jacket. She named our little girl on a Tuesday afternoon, November 2016. She chose Wren because wrens build their nests exactly where no one expects them to. During her final week, she made one request. She never asked me for revenge. She didn't want me to destroy her family's empire. She told me to save it. She believed the business was the very best of her. She wanted it to survive the arrogant fools who broke it, and she added one thing. Silas paused. She said her cousin Hadley would be ready when it truly mattered. Hadley finally broke down in total silence, the way someone cries when they have suppressed deep grief for years. You and I know why he stayed still. He let her cry. She sobbed quietly into her clenched fist for almost 4 minutes. He sat quietly across the table, watching that magnolia branch. The dismissed outsider didn't look away from her pain, and he didn't try to fix it either. When the tears finally stopped, she looked up with heavy, bloodshot eyes. She asked the question we all would. Why not take it yourself? Silas answered without missing a beat. Because Marin would have given it to you. Hadley closed her eyes, letting out a heavy, exhausted breath. You and I know that exhale, the sheer relief of finally hearing the one truth she had waited her whole life for. She opened her eyes, picked up the bourbon, and took a drink. He followed. Outside, somewhere down Anson Street, a screen door clicked softly shut, and the Charleston night rolled on outside, completely indifferent to their shifting power. 3 weeks drifted by in that slow, steady way an empire settles when the underestimated outsider finally holds all the real authority. Hadley's first board meeting as chair and CEO landed on a Wednesday in mid-July. The stabilization plan passed 9-3. Bradford Peton's corporate fraud, tracked through Heritage Restoration Specialists LLC and 2 vendor accounts, was quietly settled out of court, a hushed exit for the elites who once judged. Eleanor hid out in Palm Beach with lawyers and a Manhattan PR fixer, trying to salvage her shattered pride. The Beaumont Inn restoration project entered its final, crucial phase. On the Saturday of that 3rd week, Hadley drove to the property in jeans. She strolled into the back garden like someone who finally understood who really held the keys to her family's future. The work crew was thinning out. Silas was up on the 2nd floor porch holding a rag and a can of teak oil, quietly working the railing. The daily crew had dropped to just 7 men. Most of the heavy carpentry work wrapped up back in August. Only the patient finish work remained. Stick with me here. This is the kind of detail where 30-year veteran masons wear cotton gloves just to lay one single tile perfectly straight. Silas stopped checking his Boston emails exactly 3 weeks ago. His massive Boston empire was running itself just like the quiet powerhouse it always was. He hadn't figured out when to tell them he was never going back. Wren spotted Hadley first, sprinting down the brick path with a folded paper tightly in both hands. She skidded to a halt 2 feet in front of Hadley, holding it up. I drew you. Hadley gently took the page and unfolded it. A colored pencil sketch by a child, drawn on the back of a restoration blueprint paper. 3 unlabeled figures stood together underneath one massive, sprawling tree. A tall man wearing a flannel shirt, a shorter woman in a dark navy dress, a little girl with a dark braid. Above them, huge white flowers bloomed like open hands. Hadley stared at that picture for a very long time. She didn't say thank you. She didn't call it beautiful. She didn't say a single word. Instead, she knelt on the brick right at Wren's eye level and refolded the paper along its crease, treating it like a priceless artifact that could never be replaced. She tucked it safely away inside her linen shirt pocket. Wren gave a satisfied nod, then dashed off to find a ladybug on the magnolia trunk. Silas watched the whole thing from the 2nd floor porch. He'd stopped working minutes ago. Later that evening, after the crew packed out and the project trailer finally went dark, Hadley and Silas sat together on the garden's brick steps. The harbor fell completely quiet. The cicadas began softly buzzing. A single light above the back door cast a thin yellow stripe across the brickwork. Her hand rested on the step. His hand sat on the step beside him, 3 inches between them. Neither of them moved an inch. They didn't need to. We see who holds the future, she whispered. The Beaumont reopens in December. I know there is a garden dedication happening today. You and I know why. He turned his head, studying her slowly in the dim light. What will you call it? She told him. He stared at the brick between them. His mouth twitched, a tiny shift in power you almost miss. It was the subtle reaction of a man holding immense restraint. That would have made her happy, he said. The cicadas just kept humming. December arrived in Charleston like always, bringing that pale wealthy gold sunlight and a bitter harbor breeze that forced everyone into heavy winter coats by 5 p.m. The Beaumont reopened Saturday the 11th. They hosted a quiet ceremony in the private garden out back. 80 elites showed up. The mayor sent his deputy. The preservation chair made an appearance. Greta stood in the back, wearing a black wool coat. She kept quiet, watching the new social order. Greta had carried a tiny bouquet. 3 white camellias inside a simple glass jar, tied up. She placed them by the old magnolia tree before things kicked off. No signature. She knew her place now. She didn't have to. Marin taught her how to fold fine linen back in '97, and Greta remembered. The huge magnolia dropped its flowers months ago. Still, it glowed from below. The crew placed 3 hidden bulbs there, following Silas's very quiet but absolute instructions. The soft light caught. It hit the lower branches, making the bare canopy look like towering, deliberate architecture. A small bronze plaque now sat anchored in the brickwork by the roots, the Marin Peton Renwick Memorial Garden. Hadley spoke for 4 minutes, entirely unscripted. Let's watch this pivot together. She didn't mention the corporate empire nor her mother. She didn't bring up that brutal June boardroom takeover either. Or the restoration. Not even the 7 generations of wealthy Peton who controlled this garden. Instead, she praised a cousin who taught her to read a financial sheet at 16. She talked about a woman who sat on a wooden bench in this exact spot every single Sunday, calling that old magnolia the only honest thing around. She finally acknowledged a name she had refused to say out loud for a very long time. She repeated the name 3 times, Marin, Marin. Stepping back from the podium, she listened as the crowd gave that soft, measured, classic Charleston applause. The polite clapping of an elite class who never needed volume to show who held the cards. Silas stood firmly in back, his daughter Wren riding on his shoulders in a bright red coat. Her tiny hands gripped his head. She kept her eyes locked entirely on Hadley the whole time. As the guests cleared out, Hadley approached them. She, the former boss, didn't speak first. Wren leaned down from Silas's broad shoulders, reaching out one little mittened hand. Hadley accepted it. The 3 of them stood silently under that giant magnolia. The bronze plaque by their feet caught the final fading daylight. "Don't go back to Boston," Hadley whispered, finally admitting defeat. Silas studied her for a long time. He didn't smile. He looked at her like a man finally reaching a future they once told him he couldn't have. "We weren't planning to," a heavy pause. "If that is an invitation, we accept." She nodded once, he nodded back. Wren flashed a wide, toothy grin, pure and simple because she was only 8. And an 8-year-old knows what staying means way before the adults finally agree to say it. The 3 turned around, walking down that old brick pathway together, heading toward the heavy gate. The evening light drained from the sky and stages behind them. The iron gate clicked shut. She asked the dismissed man to stay. "We know he already owned their future."